I want to know how to get through to something new, something of my own. So sings the second artist George in Sondheim and Lapine's musical Sunday in the Park with George. George is wrestling with his identity as an artist, wanting to make something new, something of his own. To do so, his journey takes him both backward, connecting mystically through the muse of his great-grandfather Georges Seurat to his past, to his legacy, to his inheritance, and forward, moving on to something that comes distinctly from himself. Today's guest, in his recent book, shares some of his own journey to get through to something new. A journey driven by two incurable passions, the theology that does not yet exist and the tragic condition of humanity tortured by barbaric globalism. In this book, today's guest builds on the familiar missiological framework of outside the gate, established by Orlando Costas, to recover important elements in ancestral traditions of the Americas, with an eye to discerning pneumatological continuity between pre-Columbian and post-Columbian communities. He calls for a rerouting of theology, a realization that theology cannot make its home in Christendom, but is a global creation that must come home to a church without borders. Welcome to Love, Rinse, Repeat, a podcast recorded on dark and young land by me, Liam Miller, he, him, his, a minister in the Uniting Church in Australia. My guest today is Oscar Garcia-Johnson, Academic Dean for the Center for the Study of Hispanic Church and Community, an Associate Professor of Theology and Latino Studies at Fuller Theological Seminary. His writings include Spirit Outside the Gate, Decolonial Pneumatologies of the American Global South, out now with IVP Academic and the subject of our conversation today. But he's also written Theology Without Borders, Introduction to Global Conversations, co-authored with William Dryness, and the Mestizo Community of the Spirit, a Latino postmodern ecclesiology, plus many more that are listed in the show notes. Please welcome our guest, Oscar Garcia-Johnson, as we discuss Spirit Outside the Gate on Love, Rinse, Repeat. Well, Oscar Garcia-Johnson, welcome to Love, Rinse, Repeat.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Glad to be with you, Lion, and all the audience and people I don't know, but I'm, eager to establish contact with and begin a dialogue.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. So we're going to talk today primarily about your new book, Spirit Outside the Gate, Decolonial Pneumatologies of the American Global South, which is out through IVP Academic, and people can pick that up, part of that missiological engagement series. So that's where we're centering. So I thought maybe as a way of just kind of wading into the book, you write at one point, in truth, every theology bears the marks of a narrative of its theologian, who is the teller. So I guess let's start, I guess, a bit with your own narrative. You kind of talk about your path from a Chiquita banana kid to a diasporic US Latinx activist scholar. So I guess can you just talk to us a bit about that journey and how it shapes the book and particularly, I guess, your hopes for the book?
Sure. Well, let's say this. Diasporas are very interesting places, spaces that are very strange. When I think of a diaspora experience, I'm thinking of a Moses and the burning bush in a diaspora, kind of a, if you see chapter 3 and 4, it's really about him. There's a lot of text surrounding one individual, God, and it's just trying to establish this relationship. Who am I to do whatever? That who am I, and particularly where am I? Those two are a huge question, diasporic question. Who am I and where am I? So that I can do, think, feel, believe, whatever. And that is a place of self-questioning, I would argue. I would even advise, colleagues and friends that may be listening to this, if you want to experience a little bit how well you know yourself and how well you think you you are self-aware to have a diaspora experience. In a way, that's why in theological education, you know, in doctoral education, you're asked, I mean, it's a good practice to get out of your niche, go for 3-4 years somewhere else and come back. It's not just to decontextualize you. That's not, I mean, that happens, unfortunately. It's to move you away and have you look at things from a different angle of vision. And I think that's what I see in Moses. That's what I see in David in the house of the enemies. David asking himself, you know, that's what I see in the case of Mary. Imagine Mary and Joseph back in Egypt, the place where the Jews were supposed to leave. They're back there with baby Jesus. And so we can go to many of those places. In my case, I think I became aware of how not American I was when I came to the States. It's like African brothers and sisters coming to the States. They say, I didn't know I was Black until I hit the United States, you know, that kind of experience. And because Honduras, my country of origin, was a very Americanized. And by Americanized, I'm using here the common language of the United States. I'm not using the continental. I mean, America is clearly not a country; it's a continent, and it's a way of being in a hemispheric sense. But for the sake of this conversation, I'm using that, and when I'm not, I'm going to let you know. And so in Honduras, you know, the U.S. is super important. I mean, that was the place where the Cold War was in a way stopped in Central America. You know, Nicaragua, Guatemala, El Salvador, and it was positioned in Honduras. So there's a lot of things happening there, and not the least of things. 100, I mean, at least 80 years of economic dominance from a couple transnationals, such as the United Fruit Company and Dole, what is called the Chiquita banana. And so for 80 years, the Chiquita banana was a powerful economic force in Honduras. But as usual, you know, economic powers also have political power, and particularly cultural power, and even religious powers, because everywhere you will find a plantation, you'll find a church, you know, Presbyterian church, Methodist church, Baptist church. Later on, there was more like Pentecostal movement, but Pentecostal didn't go to that area that much. It was more like the mainline denominations. So that's a big piece of my story. And I use that to kind of subvert the conversation. And I call myself, I'm a Chiquita banana kid. And someplace else in another writing, I say, I'm a banana republic theologians. And you know, the banana republic is a bad word, meaning that that's a place where nothing can be controlled because there's no local leadership. And yet there's a lot of influence from the outside. Interesting. We criticize banana republics. And yet, for example, from my country, the United States here, this is my other country, I have a couple of countries. We have the military, we have international, you know, for the CIA and you know, and we have economic power that in a way makes sure that country is run that way. So the country in itself is a banana republic country, but the forces that makes it a banana republic are, you know, they're not responsible. So that's an interesting combination, and in a way that I'm playing into that, saying I'm a banana republic theologian, because that's where I was made into an American, so to speak, and that's when I decided to come to the United States, because I felt the United States was part of my reality. Although I was born in Honduras, my grandfather was a white from the South, and my great-grandfather was from Great Britain. So I got all the blood that you needed and all the story you needed. And my dad happened to work in the Chiquita banana as a middle manager. So I lived amongst the privileged and the powerful as my book sometimes reflects to that, particularly Theology Without Border. I elaborate a little bit more on that. And in a way, but I'm aware of that not while I'm in Honduras. I'm aware of that when I'm here. Probably after dealing with different critical thinking, traditions, liberation theology, U.S. Latinx theology, critical thinking. And then I'm very interested in literature, and I see people in literature, how biographies are important elements of self-awareness and self-representation. And it's then when I say, okay, how am I to represent myself when I'm speaking with my fellow white male American, or my fellow white male European, or for that sake, white male Australian, or my friends from other, or colleagues or fellows from other ethnic circles. How am I to represent myself in a way that when I speak, there is more than one place. There is a history, there is a philosophy, there is a culture, and there is a provocation to get to know you and that environment better. And I think that's what causes, this is in a way pieces of literature more than anything else that provoke. And that's part of what I try to do with theology. I try to insert, pieces of literature that are provoking and then required extra work. So, okay, what do you mean by this? And let's go deep. I tend to do that. And so I think you notice that. So that's what it's in that. It's it all happens in the diaspora. And I had to, by the way, let me kind of finish here in this section by saying that while I was becoming aware of that relationship between, for example, Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean, the United States and Latin America and the Caribbean, that interrelationality, that intersection. I've always knew that I was going to be a person of multiple worlds and of multiple locations, and I'll be a commuter. I'll be commuting, and in that commuting, I'll have to learn to be a citizen of many places. And in a way, what we're trying to say is a global citizen right now. So in that sense, I have to go back to Latin America in many ways from the United States. I learned how to write essays here in the United States, although I came here at 20 years old, but I was in electrical engineering. We do math, we don't do essays. We do math. Yeah. I mean, we don't write essays in electrical engineering. So I had to learn the language here in the States, the Spanish and English and the humanities. So.
Yeah, well, thank you for all that. That's really helpful. So when you write a book, you know what's going on around you, and that obviously influences what you're writing, but you don't know the world in which it's going to be read. And so this book has been probably, predominantly read in 2020, which obviously, is amidst COVID and, the varying responses of, government and churches, and it's been read amidst, the continued violence against Black and brown bodies by law enforcement, and the huge, large-scale global protests that erupted in response, and it's been read amidst a presidential election and ongoing aftermath of that election, as those democratic institutions and norms and values that we thought unassailable all of a sudden proved maybe more fragile than we thought. How have you either your own thinking about the book in this world, the book in this year, and I guess the reception you've had from others who are reading it in this time, has that surprised you? What you've expected, or has it changed your own attitude toward the book? Anything around that?
Yeah, I think I would not have changed anything, because in a way, what I was interacting with was with world systems. And if anything, Liam, what I was happy to see is that I mean, whenever I think of my book, what it did and didn't do, and our time, the COVID, I'm writing another theology, a series in Spanish that I'm calling it Theology of the New World, and has three connotations. The New World is the term we were given, I mean, the Latin American people, by Iberian powers. However, I mean, it was a derogative, saying it wasn't a new world because there were ancient civilizations there. It wasn't a new territory because they were living there. They were creating culture and all. But anyway, it was a new world. But indeed, what happened with the encounter of Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and the indigenous peoples of the Americas is a new world. A new world came, but not necessarily the new world invented by that particular colonial moment, because there were going to be other colonial moments. They're going to have the French, the British, the United States is the latest. Those colonial moments, in a way, have created multiple, I would say, layers of identity. And so I'm calling, okay, there is indeed a new world, and that new world it's a new world that has been, in a way, the production of these people that have been, that have received the transformation of their humanitas and the transformation of the lands into commodities of multiple powers, and even their own, hierarchies and creoles and all that, creating all this discrepancies. And so in a way, we have created culture, we have created religions, we have created philosophies, we have created theologies, we have created sciences that many people don't even know. So let me show you what this new world is doing. And then at the same time, all this is happening when we're in a new world, the post-COVID. So you see, these are three layers why I'm calling it Theology of the New World, in Spanish, Teología del Nuevo Mundo. And so in a way, I think that was not named in this book, but in a way, that's what I'm trying to say, and I'm trying to write. And whenever I think our time and this book, the word rabbit hole, going deep into the rabbit's hole, it's what it comes to mind. I think my book does try to take us deep into the rabbit hole, into some of the causes and the roots of what we see expressed today. When COVID hits, there are some people that are less valuable and more disposable than others. There are economies that self-protect while at the same time put into risk other economies. There are places of power, privilege, and white normativity, white supremacy, Western normativity that retrench with the fear of losing 400 years of progress, not acknowledging that power was built on somebody else's land, somebody else's shoulder. Because without the African, there is no United States the way there is, the same way that, there are cross fertilization there, but we have to admit that we did not come as an independent prodigy that self-create ourselves, and then everybody else was around, and that's not the way it happened. So that's the systemic thing that I'm trying to deal with. And for a theologian, clearly this is an immense and difficult work. This is usually the work of sociologists. This is usually the work of political theories. I was trained in none of them. So I have to really got acquainted with multiple disciplines, and even use literature as a way to create metaphors. And my English here is an English that kind of disrupts English. It creates an all of neologism. So in a way, I'm creating a grammar and a syntax, as I said, as a way to say, okay, we cannot think in the same way if we want to move beyond what we have produced, kind of an Einsteinian, lab. You want a different physics, you're gonna have to give me a different lab. I cannot continue with this mechanic, Newtonian mechanic. So I need a different lab. So let me build it and let's talk about another theory. In a way, I'm not pretending to be anything close to Einstein, but I'm trained that our mental models and our imagination have to be above the problems we have invented, created, and sustained, willingly or unwillingly, conscious or unconscious, because ignorance is not, I would say, is not a justification for saying I have nothing to do with it. Well, we have to get knowledgeable and begin by owning our own ignorance, to say, okay, I own this ignorance, and this is part of my learning. It's not bad to own my ignorance. It is bad to be ignorant and not know it.
Yeah. Oh, that's really important. Thank you. You write in the preface, and this is coming out already in this interview, that you have two incurable passions: the theology that does not yet exist, and the tragic condition of humanity tortured by barbaric globalism. And as a way of bringing about the former, that theology that does not yet exist, in a way that attends to the latter, that barbaric globalism, you seek to do theology in the colonial difference, which means, and I'm quoting here, centering indigenous practices, values, and ideas that were targeted for eradication by colonizers, exploring ways of writing, thinking, practicing theology that would begin deconstructing embedded power imbalances and establishing decolonial methodologies. And now I think this is something that obviously, if people who are reading the book or listening to this interview in Australia should hopefully be immediately drawn to. So I thought it'd be good to ask a bit about, how doing theology in the colonial difference, shapes the approach to the work, where the work led to. And I guess, it must be interesting, when you're working in, as you say, you learnt to write, in the kind of in the US Academy kind of thing, and you teach in that, and there's obviously always this pull probably back toward occidentalized theology and occidentalized modes of expression and canonical sources and epistemic norms, and resisting that pull where hey, surely you'll be much quickly more accepted if you just do this thing that we all is already well accepted and appreciated.
Yeah, sure. The first thing I had to go through when I was writing this book is a clear sense of, this is what God has called me to do. This book and my ideas have been conceived in deep prayer and deep sense of communication with God, and the Spirit has been vividly part of this. I mean, people who probably get in contact with my book will rarely place me as an evangelical, but if you go deep, there is an evangelical. And I play with words, so I am so evangelical and so evangel rooted and sub-theological that I see God everywhere and the work of the gospel everywhere. So why to limit the evangel to traditions of the West? Why? I mean, so I'm aiming here for a bigger God. I mean, the God that we said in the Middle Ages that is omnipresent. The God that we said in the Middle Ages and the classical way of theology that is omnipotent. That kind of God is the God. I believe those things. So if God is omnipresent, and we're going to take to, we're going to really assume the consequences of that. We cannot pretend that God is only acting in a little piece of Europe.
Yeah.
God is acting everywhere, and is acting and is operating and is self-revealing everywhere else. So this is part of what I put into play, classical terms into their own inconsistencies, and saying by the way, Transoccidentality, well, we're going to get there at some point, in a way says, you know what, there are very important elements in the Occident, in Western culture, in Western spirituality, in Western theology, in Western people, which in a way, Western is an essentialism, but let's continue that we should not get rid of. That would be another form of epistemicide. Killing the knowledge, it is undoing good things, but not everything was good. There are things that were completely wrong. For example, there were cartographic errors when Europeans came to the Americas. They thought they were in India and China and Japan. They began to put names, Indians, to people that had other names, and Tawantinsuyo, Haiti, and Arawak. Okay, that's one problem, the cartographic problem. But there were theological deficiencies, huge theological deficiencies. For example, the first thing was to make this population that had all the evidences of civilization, not a Renaissance civilization, not an European civilization, but civilization nonetheless. If not, you just have to read the chronicles of Bernardo Castillo and Soyagung and others, and say, well, the stones, the buildings, the artifacts that had to be destroyed, that's the epistemicide, that had to be destroyed because they were so powerful that if we let these artifacts stay, that civilization will not convert into my civilization. So I have to destroy, exterminate that knowledge, and whoever and whatever interferes with that. So that is a theological error of that goes against everything I said. God, all omniscient, God, all powerful, God, present everywhere, as if God was not there. And indeed, the idea was that God was not there; it was the devil. So, mission-driven initiatives, I'm calling this name, have been antibiotic, in the sense that whatever native, whatever non-European is a bacteria that needs to be exterminated. And the gospel is the medicine, is the drug, is the antibiotic that needs to exterminate whatever native other, that there is there. And that is clearly a theological defect that caused genocides, ethnocides, and a whole bunch of things. So in that sense, I think that that's been part of the whole issue, and I guess that's part of what I'm trying to bring into question. What if God? I'm changing the question. The question is not if God is there, but where was God? Doing what? Can we look into whatever we have in our power? Because a lot of things we exterminated long ago. But there are for example, there's translations from the Nahuatl into Spanish and other languages that we can see the local translator putting their own theology, so we can rescue that. And that's what I'm trying to do in my work. So my work, I hope it's appreciated at some point, after you can go up through the dense criticism that I put through, because I am highly critical, but at the same time, I try to be highly constructive in the sense that I'm trying to look for the intersection of westernized Christianity and indigenous self-creation. And at that very point that some people, I would argue, wrongly is called syncretism, or they may call it whatever. What problem I have is what they have in mind when they say that, or Christopaganism. I call it a synthesis. These places of border Christianity or regional Christianities. And just to get to your question, that is a fertile place, a place that is able to fertilize our imagination. And the question is not how different is these and in which way this reflects the work of the devil, because every time we ask that, we bring the devil into it, because the devil is always in our imaginary. And in the case of the Iberian, it was in the Muslim community, it was in the Jews, it was in women. You have the feminicides, of women, witches killed by thousands in Europe. So what if in theology and missions, instead of looking for the devil, that is a Western fascination, we begin to look for God, really, everywhere. And I think it's a simple thing. Yeah. It's a kind of, even a Franciscan thing, Francis of Assisi. You'll find it in our own traditions in the West. It's just that they're not the powerful one, they're the marginal ones. But this is a simple initiative, that hopes to look for life and not for death. That's what I call a probiotic mission instead of antibiotic mission. A probiotic also doesn't try to kill the bad cells. It tries to fortify the good cells, so to speak, and the good part of the body, so to speak, putting good bacteria into the body. So I think that's a way that I try to approach, theology. I don't deny that there are evil, but as I said, they're evil in Pentecostal churches, they're evil in Anglican churches, they're evil in Baptist churches. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of evil in churches. So evil, you'll find it everywhere, as well as God.
Thank you. I'm going to give people a pause. You can go on. Like, I think after that response, people are going to go, buy the book, open another tab while you got your phone on your hand already. Let's do it. Let's get the book. That's incredible. Thank you. Well, we've touched a bit then on the transoccidental approach and how it repositions Christian identity, toward a community in movement, which then directs a, quote, missional option for the immigrant of the American global South, where people in movement represent a space of revelation, reflection, and political activity, where the missio spiritus bestows meaning, dignity, and hope to a typically displaced people in a journey where the spirit outside the gates travels as pilgrim. So borders, immigration, detention remain live and often despairing fights in both our contexts, both here in Australia and in the US. And beyond. So I'd love to talk about this turn toward those in movement and this shifting of locus ecclesiasticus and theologicus, and how it can reshape and spur Christian thought and action in this, ongoing and very politicized issue. And I think even just in that response there of what do you go looking for? Because so much the language around those in movement toward the border is the devil's in there. Right, the rapists, the thugs, the criminals, the queue jumpers, they're in there, rather than thinking where is God in there, as you say, where is that? And you're saying that's that place of revelation. So yeah, just open that up for discussion.
I guess I have when I wrote this, and I still have two biblical paradigms in mind. One is the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11. That it's the idea that we need to cease moving, to stop movement, to look for stability, to build out of our creativity, God-given creativity, to create culture, to create science, to create technology, to build a language, a universal language. This is pretty much you're hearing here the Enlightenment, the Enlightenment, season of the Enlightenment here. So, and the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and once we're building on that, we're creating a monocultural society, monolingual and monological and monopolic, in that place, which is a monotopic, instead of a utopia, it's a monotopia. That is the one place that is like no other place. is the promised land that we have built, is the one place, is the monotopia, the place in the map that we can say progress is there. And we are almost like God. That is, in a way, you can find that in imperial societies. And if you look very carefully, you'll find that in multiple current superpowers right now. And unfortunately, I'm sitting in one of them. And here in the United States, we've like never before, we've had that type of appeal. Close the borders, stop moving, self-contained. Well, I don't have to speak. You guys know what I'm talking about. That's one of the biblical paradigms. The Babylonian logic, some people call it, I call it too. There's another paradigm that to me, it's much more appealing, which is the Pentecost, Acts chapter 2, which in a way, what the first one does, because the first one is not bad entirely. God shows up in Genesis 11 and brings all these people and disperse them and send them. And in the way, they became missionaries, so to speak. They became builders, city builders. They built multiple societies. To the when we go to Acts chapter 2, the resemblance is that you have a lot of those multiple language, multiple cultures, multiple societies. However, Jews they are, Judites they are, proselytes or friends of Jews or Jews from all over the places. The metaphor there is that the outspring of Babel, it's in Acts chapter 2. And now in chapter 2, God shows up again, but not to disperse in the same way. It's out of the many create a pathway, not to assimilate them, but to create a pathway that has multiple ways. It's a way forward. It's not a pathway in the sense of going back to a restorationist idea. It is a way forward based on the new creation, based on the idea that God is big enough to carry the mission to the ends of the earth. That Jesus' resurrection means the diversification of humanity in multiple ways. So we can go and go and go and go and go in this, and that every culture is in a way dignified and affirmed because we all heard the wonders of God in our own language. So that is what's in the mind here. And then the people, that in a way was pretty much influenced there by this presence of the Spirit, so to speak, was in a way continue their trouble and went back. And you know what happened through the book of Acts, and then through the 4 centuries of the church, and then later on, I think what is happening in the book of Acts and Luke Acts narrative, and what we see in the Pauline literature is in a way an account and how the many are affirmed in God, and out of the many we can be together. It is not homogenization; it is togetherness. It is the miracle of koinonia, of being able to see each other because of Christ. In that sense, I'm quoting Bonhoeffer, right? Because of Christ, through Christ, and in front of Christ. Because of him, in him, and through him is that the enemies become friends. It's Bonhoeffer right here. And then the Spirit is the spirit of communion. And that's Barth, that's Karl Barth. So I'm very Occidental in many ways too. But that Spirit is an eruption that happens not just in my little experience of humanity, it happens in multiple ways in biodiversity, and that is Leonardo Boff right there, you know, and erupts in the cosmos, erupts in nature, erupts in places and indigenous communities that God is present in ways that now we theologians ought to create language instead of dismissing that, because we don't have a language, so we're going to dismiss that. So in that sense, Transoccidentalism, it's in a way trying to do what I think Edward Said at some point said, that Orientalism is the imagined other of the Orient used for, you know, subjugation and all that. And I'm asking, what if the subaltern community sharing colonial and modern subjugations were to say, I would like to imagine myself. I would like to imagine myself as if coloniality, modernity, and Occidentalism is not the ultimate power and the limit of my being, of my living, of my life, and of my faith. So it is an exercise of self-imagination, hopefully in the spirit in my case, because I'm a Christian and I'm a theologian. It's not simply a utopian on the left or the right. It is a utopian in Christ, so I call it theotopia, a theotopia in that sense. What if that is possible? I would argue that imagination is the beginning of whatever experiment we want to do in the spirit and in Jesus Christ. The experiment that we don't have to simply kill everybody that is different, because now let's suppose a new race that is not white comes to power. Now we're going to exterminate everybody else. We're going to continue the same path. What are we going to do? What have we learned? So it is the ability to in a way, cross the border of inferiority, of neglect, of demeaning, of dehumanizing, and say, how can I keep enough of myself as I am becoming somebody else, and entertain the possibility of multiple identities? And that is in a way diaspora, and that's what immigrants has to do. When immigrants have to travel, they have to learn multiple languages, they have to acquire multiple, you know, and it's a bit schizophrenic, but it's life nonetheless. That's what Paul had to do. That's what a lot of people had to do. So the idea that we're, you know, that Babel logic, it's really the place we need to be, our nation state narrative versus the way, the traveling, and being citizens of multiple cities, multiple worlds, and contributed in all of them. That is your, you know, your place of vocation. Use it, be the best person you can be, do the best you can do, learn a lot at the beginning instead of bringing your own ideas and culture as if those were the only ones. I mean, in a way, it's a very missionary way of living, hopefully in the sense.
Yes, thank you for that. So let's get to the spirit. You know, one of the questions on the back of the cover of the book is, what are Christians to make of the Holy Spirit's occasional encounters with cultures and religions in the Americas before the European conquest? As you kind of talked about before, if we're taking omnipresence and the bigness of God seriously. So I'm a minister in the Uniting Church in Australia, and in 2009, the revised preamble to the Constitution that we agreed upon begins point 3 with the following confession. The first peoples had already encountered the Creator God before the arrival of the colonizers. The Spirit was already in the land, revealing God to the people through law, custom, and ceremony. Now, I'm not so much bringing this up to, you know, ask your thoughts on this example of the church making something of the presence of the Spirit, but more, I guess, leading us into a discussion of your rerouting of theology by keeping an eye to discerning pneumatological continuity between pre-Columbian and post-Columbian communities.
Yeah, well, when I hear that statement, several things come to mind. Number one, and this is not a criticism or praise, is I'm saying is it's very pretty much in what I'm in the line of what I'm in a way it's an application of what I'm doing. So number one, I would say what a little, or that's good that is happened there. It's a little late that it's happened there. But if you have any consolation, there are places that hasn't happened yet. In places like here in the United States or Latin America or other places, there's no way that some communities will agree to something that you read of it. There's no way you will be labeled as liberal or something else, immediately. And that in a way tells me of the power of distortion and how we have caricatured God and ourselves through the narratives of modern narratives, Occidental narratives, and narratives of what I just talked about. I'm not going to repeat the whole thing. Bad theology, bad anthropology, a lot of egology. I mean, and a great sense of the liberal principles of individualism, humanism, and in a way, capitalism and economy, because in a way, the level of humanity will be graded, will be rated by how productive is this person in this system we call capitalism, how civilized is this person, and if we put it in our social norms, how valuable is that person if he dies or doesn't die, how dispensable or not. So in that sense, the qualification of humanities, of individuals, so thinking of the imago Dei as some of the patristic and matristic, thinkers thought that likeness of God and image of God, it's difficult for some of us that have been that have grown out of these traditions that neglect anything that is different. And therefore I would say that seeing the Spirit of God, which in a way is the Spirit that gives life to the earth, to the cosmos, is the Spirit of life, to cite Moltmann here, Moltmann, and is the wild child of the Trinity, to cite here Saida Maldonado, and as I call it, the decolonial spirit. I mean, it will be difficult for people to see that, because it is not difficult to see the spirit in Plato or Aristotle, because they are part of our traditions, although Aristotle was a pagan. And we don't have a problem admitting that God was working through Aristotle, through Aristotle's philosophy and categories. But we would have a problems thinking that we don't even call it theology, we call it cosmologies. The cosmologies of the native people, of the first peoples, of the First Nations, have anything of God. Mm. At the bottom of that is the fact that they're not fully human. So if they're not fully human, like me, see the positioning of myself here, then they cannot show me God. I have to show them God. They cannot carry the image of God. So there is this, and I keep insisting in that, because the humanitas and the societas they were, land and people were the two things that were transformed. After that, anything else was easy. If you don't transform people into, number one, religious-less, they don't have any religion, they only have pagan cultures, They don't have religions, therefore they cannot be considered humans. Jews had religions, they had the wrong religions. Muslims even, they had religions, they had the wrong religion. But Indians and Africans, they don't have religions, therefore they cannot be humans. So the religionless creatures of Africa and the Americas is the first thing, and then after that they don't have soul. Let's move into that, and that was the whole thing. And sure, we can say that the Pope said in a piece of paper, okay, the Indians have soul, but they were treated as if they didn't have any soul. So at the end of the day, Guinness Sepulveda won the battle, the battle of against Bartolome de las Casas on the fact that the colonial economy, and later on everybody else, all the way to modern civilizing projects, in a way saw these indigenous people. And now it's not just the indigenous people, it's anybody related to whoever is not me at the high class. So it is a problem in our humanities. I don't mean to create a conflict here, but there were some times in which Australians were not considered by British at the same level, the same way the Irish. So it is a problem in our humanities. And when we are in front of something which is radically different, the similar ones will tend to unite, like in the United States, the so-called melting pot. The melting pot is good for white Europeans, for nobody else. And yet, if you go deep, somehow you're going to find the root. We're not equal at the very front, because this is a problem in our humanities, and we have not resolved it. We have translated and put it off into somebody else, and we still have to deal with that issue. So my argument here there is that that there needs to be two things in everybody. This is not against, whiteness, race is in a way an invention, and it's an invention that is very real, by the way. It's real right now. We're racialized. I think it needs to be. I would argue that in the white Euro-American community, the white Euro-American community, I would argue, need to go through two processes. We all need to do processes, okay? Because we have a lot of internal, but I'm talking about the white Euro-American tradition, which I feel a bit part of it. I'm not fully white in all the sense, 70% Europeans on my DNA and all that, but 19% native Indians, all that thing. I think the first thing is we need to de-occidentalize our ego. We need to really de-occidentalize our ego, because we have deemed the occidental self as the exemplar and the most important aspect of our humanity. As long as we have our ego occidentalized, we will continue to have white supremacy or occidental supremacy, whatever you want to call it. It's going to come in different forms. And the second thing, we need to diversify our occidentality. You see what I'm saying? I'm not saying we need to give up who we are and where we were born and our traditions. As a matter of fact, we need to diversify our occidentality, because I think we have believed the myth of Hegel and others that think this thing called Europe and the West. I mean, at the end of the day, we're gonna have to admit our clans, our tribes. We're gonna see this is part of who we've been. And that's happening right now. It's happening in Ireland, it's happening in Spain, it's happening in multiple places. It's happening. It's kind of reclaiming the roots, so to speak. And that process needs to be oriented by good theology. Not by the theology of the Enlightenment that has one thing. No, it's by the theology that is in a way comparative, and a way that is post-colonial, in a way that is, in a way, hopefully transoccidental, to say there is these things that you need to keep, because it's extremely important. It's who you are. And there's all the things that you have to recognize you have or you can acquire in order to create a better world, another church, another culture. So I think those two processes need to go through the self-conceived, white, I would say, Euro-American population. But those two and other two needs to go through the occidentalized, colonized persons that they will want, like me, we want to become like the white Americans. That's the perfect, in Latin America, that's the perfect human being. You want to be like that. That's what success looks like, the mystical north. So there is a lot of things that needs to go through that process. So I'm going to stop because
we're coming to the end of our time. There's so much more that we could have discussed with the book. So much more about the spirit as decolonial healer. Why the term the pneumatology, but which is very important the way you lay that out in the book. But that's the thing, you lay it out in the book. So folks, if you've been like, I want this conversation to keep going, it goes for several hundred pages here. The book, Spirit Outside the Gate, Decolonial Pneumatologies of the American Global South. Again, you can go and collect that now, or give it to someone for a Christmas gift if you're still looking for that kind of thing. Oscar Garcia-Johnson, thank you so much for joining Love, Rinse, Repeat. Is there anything else you want to draw people's attention to or promote, or ways people can connect with you and what you're doing?
Well, I think what I've experienced, I've said this, but I've experienced people coming into my book. The book is, without me necessarily wanting to, kind of technical and heavy in many ways, although I try to be pedagogical and put in even sidebars to explain terms and all that. But I am dealing with world systems here. So I thought that I needed to clearly show how the making of the American continent is a global endeavor that has multiple layers up to today. And if we can see that, we will see many things are interconnected. That's one thing. The second thing is, I saw that people doing missions and theology, particularly looking for answers, not the ones that know what to do, but particularly those who have discovered that we need help. That this can be a place, a reference to deal with root problems and possible solutions. I've found that many are coming into this saying to me, I had the instinct, and you're giving me a language. It's a difficult language you're giving me, but you're giving me a language into how to name things that I know are there. And I think that's part of what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a language that integrates and doesn't disintegrate, so to speak. Integrate not into one piece, but create the intersections. And I think that's something, and I'm applying these, working with denominations. For example, I just did a workshop called The Landless Leader, Leading in Between. I apply a lot of this.
Oh, great. Well, people should check that. And as I say, the book, I still think, as you say, you do a lot of work with the sidebars and the language, in the writing has a great flow and passion and creativity and inventiveness. And I think, even if you haven't, gone through, theological training, there's something in this book for you. I definitely think that. So thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we can chat again sometime soon.
Thank you very much, Liam, and to everybody else listening. I hope you've enjoyed this. I have, and we're always open to conversations.
Great.